I watched in horror as Karen Patterson stood on my front porch, pointing her perfectly manicured finger at my wife like she was identifying a wanted terrorist. The police officers flanked Sarah on both sides, their hands resting on their weapons while Karen's voice cut through the suburban silence like a blade. "She has been stockpiling weapons for months," Karen shrieked, her face twisted with manufactured terror. "I have documented evidence of suspicious government activities. This woman is a clear and present danger to our neighborhood." Sarah stood perfectly still, her military training evident in every controlled breath. 6 months of classified operations in Israel had prepared her for many things, but not this. Not being accused of terrorism in her own driveway by a neighbor who knew nothing about the sacrifices she made to keep our country safe. That was the moment I realized Karen Patterson had made the biggest mistake of her life. She had no idea who she was really dealing with. The afternoon sun painted our suburban street in golden hues as I waited by the front window, watching for the black sedan that would bring Sarah home. 6 months felt like 6 years when your wife disappears into classified operations that you cannot discuss with anyone, not even your closest friends. The empty house had become a monument to secrets and sacrifice, every quiet evening a reminder of the price we pay for freedom. When the unmarked government vehicle finally pulled into our driveway, my heart hammered against my ribs like a caged bird desperate for release. Sarah emerged from the passenger seat looking like a shadow of the woman who had left in January. Her usually bright eyes carried the weight of things she could never share, and her movements held the careful precision of someone who had spent months navigating dangerous territory. "Welcome home," I whispered as she crossed the threshold, pulling her into an embrace that tried to communicate everything words could not express. She felt thinner in my arms, harder somehow, as if the soft edges of civilian life had been carved away by necessity and survival. "It feels strange being back," Sarah admitted quietly, her voice carrying the exhaustion that sleep could not cure. "Everything looks the same, but I feel like a different person." We moved her equipment into the garage with practiced efficiency, the military duffel bags and sealed cases containing stories that would remain buried in classified files forever. I caught glimpses of gear that spoke to operations far more serious than her previous assignments, but I knew better than to ask questions that she could not answer. The peaceful reunion lasted exactly 37 minutes. Karen Patterson appeared at our front door like an unwelcome storm cloud, her perfectly styled blonde hair and designer yoga outfit making her look like she had stepped out of a suburban lifestyle magazine. But her eyes held something predatory, a hungry curiosity that made my skin crawl. "Well, hello there," Karen said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I am Karen Patterson from next door. I could not help but notice the government vehicles coming and going. Where exactly have you been for the past 6 months?" Sarah's military training kicked in automatically, her posture straightening as she switched into diplomatic mode. "I work for the federal government. I was on assignment overseas." "Overseas where?" Karen pressed, her eyes narrowing with suspicious interest. "Doing what exactly? Those vehicles do not look like regular government cars." "I work in security operations," Sarah replied carefully, maintaining the cover story that protected both her mission and national interests. "I cannot discuss the specifics." Karen's expression shifted from curiosity to something darker, more calculating. She pulled out her phone and began typing notes with the methodical precision of someone building a case file. "Security operations," Karen repeated slowly, as if tasting the words for hidden meaning. "And these unmarked vehicles, how often do they visit your property?" The questions continued for another 10 minutes, each one more invasive than the last. Karen documented every detail of Sarah's appearance, our house, and the government sedan still parked in our driveway. Her interrogation felt like a hostile interview conducted by someone convinced they had uncovered a conspiracy. When Karen finally left, she walked backward down our front path, never taking her eyes off our house. The notebook remained in her hands, and I could see her lips moving as she continued making mental notes. "That woman is going to be a problem," Sarah said quietly, watching Karen disappear into her own house. I had no idea how right she would be. The surveillance began the next morning like clockwork. I discovered Karen positioned at her upstairs window with a pair of binoculars, documenting our morning routine with the dedication of a professional investigator. When I waved at her, she ducked behind the curtains, but the lens of her camera remained visible through the gap. By the end of the first week, Karen had established patrol schedules that would have impressed military commanders. She positioned herself at strategic windows throughout the day, photographing our visitors, our mail delivery, and even the landscaping crew that came to trim our hedges. Her notebook grew thicker with each passing day, filled with times, dates, and detailed observations about our supposedly suspicious activities. The HOA violation notices began arriving like poisonous love letters slipped under our door each morning. Our mailbox stood 2 inches too far from the curb, according to regulations that had never been enforced in the 15 years our neighborhood had existed. The color of our garden hose violated aesthetic standards that Karen had somehow excavated from obscure bylaw amendments buried in documents most homeowners never read. Violation notice: unauthorized parking of commercial-style vehicles. Read one citation that made my blood boil. Sarah's personal car was a standard sedan, but Karen had labeled it commercial because of the government plates that came with her security clearance. "This is insane," I muttered, reading another notice about our trash bins being placed too early for pickup. "She is literally making up reasons to harass us." Sarah maintained her professional composure, but I could see the frustration building behind her carefully controlled expression. "I have dealt with hostile governments and armed insurgents," she said quietly. "But this woman operates without any rules of engagement I recognize." The neighborhood meeting started in the third week, held in Karen's living room under the guise of discussing community security concerns. I learned about them from our neighbor Tom, who attended out of curiosity and left feeling disturbed by what he witnessed. "She has them convinced you two are running some kind of government conspiracy," Tom explained, shaking his head in disbelief. "Karen keeps talking about unmarked vehicles, secret communications, and potential security threats. She has photographs of your house from every possible angle." The poison spread through our community like a slow-acting virus. Neighbors who had waved friendly greetings for years suddenly averted their eyes when we passed on evening walks. Children who used to play in our front yard were called inside whenever we appeared. The mailmen began leaving packages at the curb instead of bringing them to our door. Karen escalated her campaign by interrogating anyone who visited our property. She questioned the pizza delivery driver about the frequency of his visits and whether we paid in cash. She cornered our lawn service crew, asking detailed questions about what they observed while working on our property. She even approached the UPS driver, claiming she was concerned about packages that might contain dangerous materials. "Ma'am, I just deliver boxes," the confused driver told me later. "But that lady next door wanted to know if you ever received packages that seemed unusually heavy or made strange sounds." The psychological warfare intensified when Karen began recruiting other neighbors as unwitting accomplices in her surveillance network. She positioned herself as the neighborhood protector, warning about government conspiracies and homeland security threats lurking behind our front door. Her campaign speeches at community gatherings painted Sarah as everything from a foreign operative to a domestic terrorist preparing for some unnamed catastrophe. Mrs. Henderson from across the street stopped by to warn us about the rumors spreading through the neighborhood. Karen has people believing you are stockpiling weapons and conducting illegal surveillance, she said, her voice heavy with concern. She claims to have evidence that you are planning something dangerous. The irony cut deep and painful. My wife spent her career protecting American interests abroad, negotiating with dangerous people in volatile regions to keep threats away from our homeland. Now she found herself branded as the very type of threat she dedicated her life to preventing. Sarah's training had prepared her for many forms of psychological warfare, but Karen's suburban terrorism followed no recognizable playbook. There were no rules of engagement, no diplomatic protocols, and no clear objectives beyond causing maximum damage to our reputation and peace of mind. Each morning brought new evidence of Karen's obsession. Fresh tire marks in our yard showed where she had crept close to our fence during nighttime reconnaissance missions. Security lights triggered at unusual hours suggested someone was testing our property boundaries under cover of darkness. The woman who positioned herself as our neighborhood protector had declared war on the very people who actually protected our community. The battle lines were drawn, and Karen had no idea what forces she had chosen to oppose. The formal complaints arrived like legal grenades designed to explode our lives into fragments. Karen had escalated beyond neighborhood harassment into weaponizing government bureaucracy against us. The city council received detailed reports about suspicious government activities occurring at our address, complete with photographs and documented timelines that painted our normal life as evidence of criminal conspiracy. Subject appears to be stockpiling weapons and surveillance equipment. Read one complaint that made my hands shake with rage. Multiple unmarked government vehicles visit the property at irregular hours. Suspect may be involved in illegal arms trafficking or domestic terrorism planning. Karen had transformed from nosy neighbor into amateur intelligence analyst, crafting reports that read like spy thriller fiction, but carried the weight of official complaints. She claimed to have documented evidence of everything from illegal weapons caches to unauthorized surveillance operations being conducted from our suburban home. The FBI field office received anonymous tips that triggered protocols designed to protect national security. Karen's carefully crafted lies landed on the desks of agents who took potential threats seriously, not knowing they were being manipulated by a vindictive neighbor with a personal vendetta against success she could not understand. We need to discuss some concerns that have been raised about your activities, the lead agent explained during what felt like an interrogation disguised as a friendly conversation. We have received multiple reports suggesting unusual government operations may be occurring at your residence. Sarah's security clearance review launched like a bureaucratic avalanche that threatened to bury 20 years of distinguished federal service under a mountain of suburban gossip and manufactured evidence. Her supervisors expressed concern about the complaints, not because they believed them, but because any hint of security issues required investigation regardless of source credibility. This could take months to resolve, Sarah explained to me that evening, her voice heavy with exhaustion and frustration. Even though the accusations are completely false, I have to prove my innocence while maintaining operational security. I cannot defend myself without compromising classified information. Karen's rumor campaign reached peak toxicity when she began spreading stories about Sarah's overseas assignments. She transformed legitimate government service into sinister conspiracy theories about foreign agents and war criminals operating under diplomatic cover. The grocery store became Karen's public theater for these performances. "Do you know what that woman next door really does?" Karen announced loudly in the produce section, her voice carrying across the store like a siren warning of approaching danger. "She claims to work for the government, but I have evidence she has been conducting illegal operations overseas. She could be anyone: a foreign spy, a war criminal, a domestic terrorist." Other shoppers stopped their conversations to stare at the spectacle, unsure whether to believe Karen's dramatic accusations or simply escape the uncomfortable confrontation. Some pulled out their phones to record what they assumed was either breaking news or a mental health crisis playing out among the vegetables. Sarah stood frozen between her training to de-escalate volatile situations and her human instinct to defend herself against slanderous attacks. The woman who had negotiated with armed militants in active combat zones found herself speechless in the face of Karen's suburban assault. "You have no idea what you are talking about," Sarah finally managed, her voice barely controlled despite years of diplomatic training. "I serve my country with honor and integrity." "Honor and integrity," Karen shrieked, her performance reaching crescendo levels of manufactured outrage. "You disappear for months at a time to who knows where, doing who knows what. Your house is crawling with unmarked government vehicles. You are exactly the kind of security threat that neighbors need to watch carefully." The public humiliation cut deeper than any physical wound, because it struck at the core of Sarah's identity as a protector and patriot. She had sacrificed personal comfort and safety to serve American interests abroad, only to find herself branded as a threat to the very people she had sworn to protect. Children began avoiding our property after their parents received warnings about the dangerous government people living next door. The community that once welcomed us with casseroles and friendly waves now watched us with suspicious eyes and crossed streets to avoid unwanted encounters. Karen's campaign had successfully transformed us from respected neighbors into social pariahs, based on nothing more than her creative fiction and relentless harassment. The accusations were absurd, but their impact on our daily lives was devastatingly real. The breaking point arrived when Karen cornered Sarah in the parking lot after another grocery store performance, this time with her phone recording everything for what she claimed would be evidence in future legal proceedings. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. Karen Patterson had declared war on the wrong family, and it was time she learned exactly who she was really fighting. The restraining order papers arrived on a Tuesday morning like a declaration of total warfare. Karen had hired an attorney and escalated our neighborhood dispute into a full legal battle, complete with court filings that painted Sarah as a clear and present danger to community safety, based on nothing more than government employment and suspicious timing. Petitioner fears for her safety and the safety of neighborhood residents. Read the legal document that made my blood pressure spike into dangerous territory. Respondent has engaged in intimidating behavior, operates from a residence containing suspected illegal weapons, and maintains associations with unknown government entities that pose potential security threats. The courthouse became our unwelcome second home, where truth and lies battled in fluorescent-lit conference rooms filled with legal documents and bitter accusations. Karen's attorney presented her case with theatrical flair that would have impressed Broadway audiences, transforming suburban paranoia into what sounded like legitimate legal concerns. "Your Honor, My client has documented months of suspicious activities that suggest the respondent may be involved in illegal government operations. Karen's lawyer announced with the gravity of someone presenting evidence in a terrorism trial. The safety of an entire neighborhood hangs in the balance. The restraining order hearing felt like a kangaroo court where paranoia and prejudice masqueraded as justice. Karen took the witness stand like an actress performing her greatest role, complete with tears and trembling voice, as she described the terror of living next to someone with Sarah's classified background. "I live in constant fear," Karen testified, dabbing her eyes with tissues while maintaining perfect makeup throughout her emotional performance. She disappears for months at a time to unknown locations. Unmarked government vehicles visit her property at all hours. I have evidence of weapons and surveillance equipment being moved in and out of her residence. The judge listened with the patience that legal proceedings require, but I could see skepticism creeping into his expression as Karen's testimony grew more dramatic and less credible with each passing minute. The HOA board meeting scheduled for the following week transformed our community center into a modern Salem witch trial, complete with finger-pointing accusations and mob mentality justice. Karen had convinced several board members that removing us from the neighborhood was necessary for community safety. "We have a responsibility to protect our residents from potential security threats," declared board member Patricia Williams, who had never spoken to us personally but seemed convinced by Karen's propaganda campaign. "If there is even a possibility that dangerous activities are occurring in our neighborhood, we must take action." Sarah's administrative leave felt like professional exile, a punishment for crimes she never committed and accusations she could not fully defend without compromising national security. Her colleagues expressed private support but maintained careful public distance, unwilling to be associated with someone under federal investigation. 20 years of service, and it comes down to this," Sarah said quietly as we reviewed the legal documents that threatened to destroy her career. "A vindictive neighbor with conspiracy theories could end everything I have worked to build." The irony stung like acid rain. The woman who had sacrificed personal comfort to protect American interests abroad now found herself branded as a potential threat to American citizens based on the fantasies of someone who knew nothing about actual government operations. Our defense attorney became our lifeline in the legal maze that Karen had constructed around us. David Martinez was a former federal prosecutor who understood both the legal system and the government security apparatus that Karen was trying to weaponize for her personal vendetta. "This is a textbook case of harassment disguised as legal action," David explained during our first strategy meeting. "The restraining order petition contains no credible evidence of actual threats or criminal activity. It reads like conspiracy theories written by someone who watches too many spy movies." The discovery process began revealing cracks in Karen's carefully constructed narrative. David's investigation uncovered a disturbing pattern of similar legal campaigns that Karen had waged against previous neighbors who failed to meet her standards of suburban conformity. "She has done this before," David reported after reviewing court records from Karen's previous addresses. 3 different neighborhoods, 3 different harassment campaigns, 3 families driven away by false accusations and legal warfare. Previous victims emerged from the shadows with their own horror stories of systematic harassment, orchestrated by the same woman who now had Sarah in her crosshairs. A military nurse who moved away after 18 months of constant legal battles. A federal prosecutor who relocated to another state to escape Karen's campaign. a homeland security analyst who sold her dream home at a loss just to find peace. She targets accomplished women who refuse to be intimidated, David observed, reviewing the case files that revealed Karen's methodology. Professional women with careers that she views as threatening to her own sense of importance and control. The pattern was clear and disturbing. Karen Patterson was not just a difficult neighbor or an overzealous community watchdog. She was a predator who systematically destroyed families for the crime of existing outside her narrow definition of acceptable suburban life. But this time, she had chosen the wrong target. Sarah's federal connections and security clearance meant that attacking her would trigger investigative resources that Karen never imagined existed. The woman who thought she was conducting a secret warfare campaign was about to discover that she had been operating under surveillance from the very beginning. The private investigator we hired turned out to be a former federal agent who understood exactly the kind of systematic harassment we were facing. Michael Torres had dealt with Karen Patterson types throughout his law enforcement career, and he approached her case with the methodical precision of someone building a criminal prosecution. Financial records tell the real story, Michael explained during our first progress meeting, spreading documents across the conference table like pieces of a complex puzzle. Karen Patterson is drowning in debt, pending divorce, maxed-out credit cards, second mortgage on the house she is about to lose. She is lashing out at anyone whose success highlights her own failures. The investigation revealed layers of deception beneath Karen's carefully constructed facade of suburban respectability. The woman who positioned herself as a guardian of neighborhood security was facing bankruptcy and domestic upheaval that explained her desperate need to control something, anything, in her rapidly disintegrating life. Karen's ex-husband emerged as a crucial witness once Michael tracked him down at his new apartment across town. Robert Patterson had lived in fear of his wife's vindictive behavior for over a decade, documenting incidents that painted a portrait of systematic manipulation and psychological abuse that extended far beyond neighborhood disputes. She would target anyone who crossed her path, Robert explained, his relief at finally having someone believe his stories palpable like sunlight after years in darkness. Neighbors, coworkers, teachers at our daughter's school. Karen kept detailed files on everyone, looking for weaknesses she could exploit if they ever disagreed with her or succeeded in ways that made her feel threatened. The federal counterinvestigation proceeded with bureaucratic thoroughness that only government agencies could muster when protecting their own personnel. Sarah's colleagues in the federal law enforcement community began connecting dots that Karen never imagined anyone would discover, using resources and databases that suburban housewives cannot access. Her anonymous complaints triggered automatic background checks, Sarah explained after receiving updates from her supervisors. When you accuse a federal agent of criminal activity, the system investigates everyone involved, including the person making the accusations. Karen's own background check revealed associations and activities that would disqualify her from the security clearances she claimed to understand. Financial troubles, domestic violence reports, and connections to individuals with criminal records painted a picture of someone who represented exactly the kind of security risk she accused others of being. The security footage became our smoking gun, captured by neighborhood cameras that Karen never knew existed. Modern suburban developments include surveillance systems that homeowners install for security but rarely monitor actively. Michael's investigation revealed that multiple houses had recorded Karen's nighttime reconnaissance missions and evidence-planting operations. "Watch this sequence from last Tuesday night," Michael said, pointing to timestamps on video footage that documented Karen trespassing on our property at 2 in the morning. She places suspicious items near your fence line, photographs them with her own camera, then removes them before dawn. She has been manufacturing evidence to support her false narratives. Each frame of video evidence systematically dismantled the credibility that Karen had spent months trying to establish through her harassment campaign. The cameras captured her placing military surplus items near our property, photographing them as evidence of weapons stockpiling, then retrieving them before anyone else could discover the deception. She has been conducting psychological operations against multiple families, Michael observed, reviewing months of surveillance footage that revealed the scope of Karen's activities. This is not random harassment. This is systematic warfare conducted by someone with serious mental health issues and a pathological need to control her environment. The pattern recognition analysis revealed Karen's methodology with scientific precision. She consistently targeted accomplished women who refused to be intimidated by her bullying tactics, using a playbook that included surveillance, legal harassment, community manipulation, and systematic character assassination. Previous victims included professionals whose careers threatened Karen's sense of suburban supremacy, the military nurse who specialized in trauma surgery, the federal prosecutor who worked on domestic terrorism cases, the Homeland Security analyst who protected critical infrastructure, all women whose success and service to country highlighted the emptiness of Karen's own existence. She studies her targets like a military strategist planning an invasion, Michael explained, showing us files that Karen had maintained on each family she had targeted. Photos, schedules, visitor logs, financial information, employment details. She builds comprehensive intelligence profiles before launching her campaigns. The federal investigation revealed that Karen's complaints had triggered scrutiny not just of Sarah, but of the entire federal operation that employed her. National security protocols required investigating anyone who demonstrated detailed knowledge of classified personnel and operations, which meant Karen herself had become a person of interest. "The irony is perfect," Sarah said with grim satisfaction. "Her attempts to destroy my security clearance have resulted in her own background being investigated by every federal agency with jurisdiction over domestic security threats." Karen Patterson had positioned herself as the neighborhood protector, while systematically terrorizing the very people who actually protected our community. But her greatest mistake was targeting someone whose federal connections could mobilize investigative resources that suburban predators never encounter. The hunter had become the hunted, and Karen had no idea that the trap was already closing around her. The emergency HOA board meeting felt like high noon in a Western showdown, where months of lies and truth would finally face each other in decisive combat. The community center buzzed with tension as neighbors filled folding chairs, everyone sensing that tonight would determine the fate of our family and possibly the entire neighborhood dynamic. Karen arrived 15 minutes early with her usual arsenal of fake tears and manufactured outrage, carrying a briefcase filled with what she believed was evidence that would force our removal from the community. She positioned herself at the front table like a prosecutor preparing for closing arguments, confident that months of manipulation had poisoned the well beyond repair. "Tonight, we finally address the security threat that has been lurking in our neighborhood," Karen announced to anyone within hearing distance. "The evidence I have compiled will shock you. We are dealing with people who pose a clear and present danger to our families and our community." Our attorney David Martinez arrived with his own briefcase, but has contained real evidence instead of conspiracy theories and manufactured accusations. The projection screen and laptop setup suggested that tonight's presentation would include visual elements that Karen had not anticipated. "Ladies and gentlemen," David began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had prosecuted actual criminals instead of imaginary threats. "We are here tonight to address a campaign of systematic harassment that has terrorized not just my clients, but this entire community." The first video clip played on the projection screen like scenes from a crime documentary, showing Karen's nighttime trespassing activities with timestamps and clear image quality that left no room for interpretation. The room grew silent as board members watched their self-appointed neighborhood protector conducting illegal surveillance operations under cover of darkness. This footage shows Karen Patterson trespassing on private property at 2:17 a.m., placing suspicious items near the fence line, photographing them as evidence, then removing them before dawn. David narrated with the clinical precision of someone presenting facts instead of emotions. Karen's face went white as the evidence mounted against her, each video clip and documented incident systematically destroying the credibility she had spent months establishing. Her carefully maintained mask of suburban respectability began cracking like old paint under pressure. "Those videos are fake," Karen stammered, her voice losing the confident authority she had wielded for months. "This is clearly a government conspiracy to silence me before I can expose their illegal activities." The second phase of our presentation included testimony from Karen's previous victims, people who had suffered through similar harassment campaigns in other neighborhoods. Robert Patterson took the podium to describe living with a wife who weaponized legal systems against anyone who crossed her path. "Karen maintains detailed files on everyone she considers a threat," Robert explained, his testimony supported by photographs of filing cabinets filled with surveillance records on innocent neighbors. "She studies people like military intelligence officers studying enemy targets, looking for weaknesses she can exploit through harassment and legal warfare." The pattern became undeniable as previous victims shared their stories of false accusations, legal battles, and systematic terrorism conducted by the same woman who now claimed to be protecting neighborhood security. The board members who had once hung on Karen's every word now stared in horror at the predator they had allowed to operate freely in their community. Karen's emotional breakdown was spectacular and terrifying, revealing the depth of mental instability that had driven her obsessive campaign against multiple families. Her carefully constructed persona crumbled like a house of cards in a hurricane, exposing the rage and vindictiveness that motivated months of harassment. "You do not understand," Karen screamed, her voice echoing through the community center like a wounded animal. "These people are dangerous. They have weapons. They conduct secret operations. Someone has to protect this neighborhood from government threats." The board vote was unanimous and swift. Karen's restraining order dissolved like morning mist under the harsh light of evidence, replaced by recommendations for criminal charges and civil liability. The neighbors who had once avoided us out of fear now approached with apologies and offers of support. But the most satisfying moment came when the police officers arrived to escort Karen from the meeting, not to arrest Sarah for imaginary crimes, but to serve Karen with papers for the real crimes she had committed through months of harassment and false reporting. Justice arrived like sunrise after the longest night, bringing warmth and light to corners that had been shrouded in darkness for too many months. The criminal charges against Karen Patterson carried the weight of documented harassment, false reporting, and perjury, each count representing a different victim of her systematic campaign of neighborhood terrorism. The district attorney treated Karen's case with the seriousness it deserved, recognizing that her harassment campaign represented a pattern of criminal behavior that extended beyond simple neighbor disputes into the realm of systematic stalking and intimidation. The woman who had tried to weaponize the legal system against innocent families now faced the full weight of actual legal consequences. The defendant engaged in a calculated campaign of harassment spanning multiple years and multiple victims, the prosecutor explained during Karen's arraignment hearing. This was not a case of neighbor disagreement, but rather systematic criminal behavior designed to terrorize families and destroy lives through false accusations and legal warfare. Sarah's security clearance restoration came with official commendations for maintaining professionalism under extreme provocation. Her federal supervisors recognized that her restraint and adherence to protocol during Karen's harassment campaign demonstrated exactly the kind of judgment and character they demanded from agents in high-security positions. Your handling of this situation reflects the highest standards of federal service, Sarah's division chief wrote in her official personnel file. Your ability to maintain operational security while defending yourself against false accusations shows exceptional professional maturity and commitment to national security protocols. The civil lawsuit provided final accountability for the emotional and financial damage Karen had inflicted through her calculated campaign of harassment and defamation. Our attorney David Martinez built an airtight case for damages that included legal fees, lost wages from Sarah's administrative leave, and compensation for intentional infliction of emotional distress. The defendant's actions were not those of a concerned neighbor, but rather a systematic campaign designed to destroy my client's reputation, career, and peace of mind. David argued during civil proceedings that resulted in substantial financial penalties against Karen. Karen's forced sale of her house served as both punishment and protection, ensuring she could no longer continue terrorizing our community from her base of operations next door. The financial penalties from criminal fines and civil judgments left her unable to maintain the lifestyle that had fueled her resentment against successful neighbors. Other victims found courage to come forward once Karen's pattern of harassment became public knowledge. The military nurse, federal prosecutor, and Homeland Security analysts all provided testimony that created a comprehensive picture of Karen's methodology and the devastating impact of her campaigns on innocent families. She destroyed my marriage and nearly ended my career, testified Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the military nurse who had been Karen's victim 3 years earlier. I thought I was going crazy until I realized that someone was systematically sabotaging my life through false accusations and community manipulation. The prosecution case became a community effort to ensure that no one else would suffer the kind of harassment that had nearly destroyed multiple families. Sarah's ordeal transformed from personal nightmare into a catalyst for protecting future potential victims from similar campaigns of suburban terrorism. Peace settled over our neighborhood like a healing balm, allowing relationships to rebuild and trust to slowly return. The community that had been poisoned by Karen's manipulation began recovering its sense of safety and mutual support that makes suburban life possible. Sarah returned to her classified work with renewed perspective on the real threats facing our nation. Her experience surviving domestic psychological warfare provided insights that enhanced her effectiveness in dealing with actual security threats abroad. I have negotiated with armed militants and diffused explosive situations in foreign countries, Sarah reflected months later. But Karen Patterson's suburban terrorism was more insidious because it attacked the very foundations of community trust and safety that make civilization possible. Our home became a sanctuary again rather than a fortress under siege. The unmarked government vehicles that had once triggered Karen's paranoid fantasies now visited without generating neighborhood panic. We could finally enjoy the peaceful suburban life that Sarah's service had earned through years of sacrifice and dedication. The woman who had tried to destroy us through lies and harassment now faced the consequences of her actions, while we rebuilt our lives stronger and more appreciative of the community bonds that survived her attempts to poison them with fear and suspicion.